America's workforce. Its strength is our nation's success. Join Ronnie Spellman on I Build America podcast as we explore innovative solutions and inspiring stories from leaders and workers shaping America. Discover actionable insights to build a motivated workforce.
Welcome to the I Build America podcast. We're back with a delightful guest, Dr. Jonathan Woods. Jonathan Woods, welcome back.
Thank you.
It's good to have you again. We had our prior conversation, and I just couldn't get enough. So I thought we have to do this again. You are the Senior Fellow for the American Council on Education. You were formerly in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. You grew up in the Central Valley area of California. You have a PhD from the University of Florida. You've done a lot of amazing things. You focused on education as generally your profession, the science of learning, data analytics. You have just an incredible career. I even just learned that you dealt with human trafficking in Afghanistan from a data analysis and science perspective, but were you also a helicopter rescue pilot? I want to start with the helicopter rescue pilot.
Not a pilot. So the pilot drives the bus. The rescue swimmer jumps out.
Rescue swimmer, yeah. So
that's right.
So you tell me what that is again. So the helicopter flies out. If someone is in the ocean, the helicopter flies out. You jump out, and you're the person to save the other person in the water.
Yeah, that's right. It's when I was in high school, I wrestled. That was my big thing. I was a wrestler, and I used to say to myself, man, you're all alone out there. There's nobody else to blame. When it's just you and your opponent on the mat. It's worse when you're a rescue swimmer because it's just you in the ocean and the victim. Okay. Fortunately for everybody involved, I never had to enter the water to save someone, but I did effectuate 2 life-saving rescues that were medevac related while I was.
How did you get in that line?
Well, it was interesting. I wanted to be at the time when you recruited into the military. You had your choice based on ASVAB scores of jobs that had vacancies, and my brother was down there just looking at jobs with me. He was going to advise me. And he said something along the lines of, they had these cards with nice pictures, and he said, if you did that, I'd do it with you. And the recruiter heard him say that and said, are you sure you don't want to do this? And so he got a twofer with us. Yeah, so that's how I ended up doing that job.
So you're an expert, though, in the learning and education realm.
Try to be. Yeah.
And you have your 3 tiers of productivity that we discussed previously. You're a data analytics person or a data person.
Absolutely.
How do you merge all of those into your expertise? And then how do you use that to drive outcomes and results? And I know that's kind of a general statement of sorts, but your background is just so intriguing and so in-depth and so technical in many ways. And I think about our workforce development professionals that are listening in, and I'm trying to figure out the questions that I can ask you to share what's in your brain, because there's so much value in what you've done and insight and knowledge that I was just amazed the last time we had our conversation. But yeah, tell us if you had to think about a person in workforce development listening to this program, what insight can you provide to them? Like, what can you tell them about their learning? The last time there were over 600,000 courses, I think you mentioned, as part of one of your projects. And that to me is just something that you can't even put concept around. Like, how can you have that many programs that are available from a learning perspective? So much of what you've done is just incredible. But let's start with your 3 tiers of productivity and then the science of learning, and walk me through some of those concepts again.
Yeah, sure. So one of the first things that I've tried to do in my career, and this develops over decades, of course, right? You don't sit down with a plan when you're 22 years old or something like that. But what I begin to realize very early on is that we do a lot of stuff. We're engaged in activities at the professional level. And we have titles, we have roles, you've thrown a few of them out there. Rescue swimmer, some people are product engineers or marketers or things like that. And one of the things that I realized is you can't let your activities define you.
Okay.
If you let your activities define you, then you will only ever be called upon for expertise in that activity.
Right.
And so, you become stovepiped.
Right.
But activities are important.
Right.
As well. And so one of the things that we can do when we're looking at a workforce program, a workforce development program, is we can say, all right, does something exist right now?
Mm-hmm.
If nothing exists, it's both easier and harder. It's easier because you start with a blank slate and you could design from the fly. But it's harder because there's a lot of work that goes into that. But usually something exists. You're starting from a shell. And so you look at I always start by looking at the activities. Well, what are the activities that we perform here, in this workforce development program? So for instance, I was invested with a program that, for the federal government, that had education centers.
Yeah.
And so operating those education centers is an activity.
Right.
It had, its primary function was counseling, education counseling.
Okay.
What do you want to be when you grow up? And why do you want to be that? And are you, capable of it? Do you currently have the capacity? And then many other things, but let's just focus on those two for a second. So these are activities. And the first question is, are these worthy activities? Well, the only way to answer that is, what kind of outcome do they produce?
Right.
And if they produce a good outcome, or if you can conceive of an outcome that they should be producing and then benchmark that, then you're onto something. Now you know that your activity is worthy, and you can become more efficient with it. You could become more effective with the activity, but you're on to something good with your workforce development. But then now that you have outcomes benchmarked or thought through, now you can start asking yourself, are these worthy outcomes?
Right.
Like I think I mentioned that one of the outcomes was roughly 50,000 degrees of some kind a year that this program was producing, or 670,000 courses it was procuring. Okay, those are outcomes. Are they worthy outcomes? Well, what would make them worthy? How would you know that they are worthy? And so then you begin benchmarking that sort of thing. But ultimately, you have to ask the question, to what effect? Right. For what purpose? Who benefits from 50,000? Would America be less economically viable if it dropped to 45,000? And would we be more economically viable if it rose to 55,000 degrees? These questions are hard to answer unless you can envision impacts of those degrees or of those courses. And so the next thing is to just brainstorm and be, and this is where having a good grounding in some of the early theorists and current theorists as well, because now you can say, well, what was Tom Gilbert after, for example, in his classic thing on human performance. And so go back to those sources and see what some of the worthy accomplishments people were seeking after through human performance interventions, and start building a strategy around that. And once you have some articulated impacts, then you can start going backwards and working with your benchmarks on outcomes, and working with your benchmarks at the foundational level of your activities to say, what can I change here to make this better? And so let me give you an example of that in practice.
Sure, absolutely.
And then you got to be ready when opportunity strikes. Right. You got to be ready to strike when opportunity happens.
Right.
So I'm sitting here with my senior executive one time in the office, and the senior executive calls me in and says, "Hey, have you ever heard of a manufacturing industry consortium named XYZ? I won't name it here." Yes. And I said, "No, I've never heard of it." "Well, look it up. We're going to see them." Okay. They had reached out to an assistant secretary in the department and said, "We'd like to talk to someone about human interactions in the manufacturing industry." So, we've been working for a number of years on reshoring. It's big in the news right now, reshoring industry, reshoring manufacturing. And so there's, in my layman's mind, there's a few things that you need to reconstitute an industrial base. You need plant assets. You need resources like ore and raw materials and things like that. And you need human assets.
We do.
So you can have the first two and nobody to work it, you know? So we went and we talked to this manufacturing industry consortium, and we talked to their VP for human interactions, and asked, well, you know, what's your strategy? Does the industry have enough people? No, we don't have enough people. We don't have enough people that are interested. And of those that are interested, they don't have the capacity. We need to build capacity, workforce development, learning capacity. And so we said, well, what do you have right now? And what we found was that there was a PDF, 1,200 page PDF with all the job skills needed. And so they had articulated that, but nobody could access that. So we had been working on and building data systems for tools for our counseling sessions. Do you know that in my program, we had a little under 1,000 counselors performing 1.8 million counseling sessions a year? And we didn't know one single fact about what transpired in those counseling sessions. So we built a tool. And the tool tracked their interactions. And so we could see the explorations. Were they talking about financial matters? Were they talking about, job interests, interest inventories? Were they talking about values on the job? I like to work independently. I like to work in teams. These kinds of things. And so we built a tool that would extract data on all of those dimensions, 5 different dimensions. And so we started building a database, an aggregated database. And what you can do when you have a database, I talked about inductive logic. You can say, then you can use BI and Power BI and some of these tools to scan through large language models, to scan through and say, what of these captured desires match to things in that 1,200 page activity document that this manufacturing industry consortium team had put together. And when we found good matches, we could report that back to the service member to say, hey, this is a good match for you. Would you be, interested in at least exploring it? And what we found, it still blows my mind. What we found when we did that is the industry consortium was getting 50 looks on their website a month. They went to 2,700 looks a month, and a conversion rate of 13%. So it was something like, I don't know what 13% of 2,700 is, something like 350 people that were setting a job in that industry, a particular job in that industry as their goal. And then working towards building their capacity on that. So if it was cybersecurity and digital manufacturing, let's say, then they would build an education plan around that and start taking one or more of those 670,000 courses that we were offering a year toward hitting the milestones to be able to move into that industry.
Now, do you think we need to look at education differently today, whether K-12, college, job-based education training? What's your thoughts on how we look at education? Is there a different way we can do it, look at it?
Yeah, I've got 2 words for you. The words are, and they're opposites, dichotomous and harmonious. And so there's one way to look at higher education, or let's say post-secondary education, because really higher education invokes the thought of just academics, but post-secondary education can be academic learning, it could be technical learning, it could be experiential learning. So let's focus on post-secondary education. But But one way to look at the realm of offerings in the post-secondary education, it's 400 years old, at least in this country.
Right.
There's been multiple waves. In fact, there's a great multiple iterations of it over those 400 years. There's a great book by Michael Crow and William DeBars called The Fifth Wave.
Right.
And it's the subtitle is the evolution of higher education. But over the lifetime, there's two camps. One camp is that the purpose of post-secondary education is knowledge generation, knowledge curation, knowledge production, and knowledge distribution. And it's all about knowledge and who owns it.
Yeah.
Okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Another camp says, no, post-secondary education in America should be about putting people to work.
Right.
Period.
Right.
Right. And so back to my two words, dichotomous and harmonious. See, I don't think that those two camps are dichotomous. I think they can be harmonious.
Okay.
And so, we can have a space that's carved out for knowledge and knowledge production, knowledge curation, knowledge distribution. And at the same time, it can be the same space that prepares the next generation for the workforce.
Sure. So my follow-up to that was going to be, should we look, same thing, but for workforce development, should we look at workforce development differently and do something different? But I think what I heard you say is that those are independent but can work together.
Mm-hmm.
So we should look at our education maybe a little differently, but it can lead to workforce development through proper education programs.
Yeah. Last time we were together, we talked a little bit about we touched on this a little bit, and the idea was that folks. I'm sorry, I'm losing my.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay.
But the idea is what I was losing was trust.
Right.
Like, do I trust you?
Correct.
Right. And so, if we can get if we can learn things like laser technology or, brain surgery or astrophysics, and we can learn things like performance of highly complex calculations, mathematical calculations, and we can get all of that at the academy, at the post-secondary institution. Why can't we get trust there too?
Sure.
Okay. And so the idea would be, well, going back to that process I told you before. Oh, okay, trust is a goal. That's an impact. How do I? What outcomes could produce an impact, and then what activities could produce the outcome that would produce the impact? And so we'd look for trust as a product of the academy or of the post-secondary experience.
And so you might have to tell me more than that. Trust is such a unique word.
Yeah.
Because it's not anything that you don't check a box and get trust.
Yeah.
Per se. It's something that is an emotional relationship between people.
Yeah.
And how do you make that happen?
Yeah. There's an ancient word, the ancient word is shibboleth.
Yes.
And I'm not sure exactly how it's defined, but the Jonathan Woods definition is a password. And it's an exchange, it's a secret handshake or something like that.
Right.
And so these things happen all the time. These secret handshakes happen all the time. And they're, also you can go back to the medieval times with the signet ring and things like that in the wax. Sure. It's the same kind of an idea. This is a marker of trust. I think one of the starting points is that the post-secondary institutions have to be the place of trust.
Okay.
And so you're seeing a lot of stuff in the news right now, denigrating that trust. There's some that want to denigrate that trust. Maybe it's time, to say, well, if the trust, if we're losing trust, how do we restore trust?
Right.
And seek after that. one way is the proof is in the pudding. And so when people are coming out of, the workforce is emerging from certain programs, you just know that program is good.
Right.
Branding is important.
Right.
And so, maybe branding, if you can brand your program, there are code words that stand for excellence, U.S. Navy SEALs. Everyone thinks of that as excellence.
Sure.
You can think of corporate branding that's excellent. Well, programmatic branding, I think, is a way to start.
It's interesting. So here's what I want you to think about, and that's a fascinating concept. And so in theory, if an organization that's working in workforce development, whether at the national, state, or even local level, if you work really hard and you execute well, you can build that brand. And then people come to you, whether a company comes to you for employees or employees come to you because they know you can connect them with an employer. And each side trusts that you're delivering a good product, right? I think that's an interesting. I'd love to have you talk about how a workforce development institution can build trust, particularly being maybe a government institution or even a nonprofit. When I think about trust, and you mentioned corporate brands, Costco has been my place of trust for a few decades because I know generally I'm getting a good quantity for the value. I'm getting a good product. And I'm getting a company that will stand behind that product if it doesn't deliver to their expectations, not just mine. And so some years ago, I purchased a television it was a big screen television. It just didn't perform well. And I contacted Costco and they gave me someone that could try to repair it. The repairs didn't work well. And ultimately, I ended up returning it. By this time, and I hate to say this, I hope they don't shoot me at Costco for this, but this was a progression over a couple of years. And so I went to them and said, we've been working on this. It just didn't work. And we've tried. And they asked, well, what do you want? And I said, I would love to have a refund. And they said, well, it's been some time. Here's what we'll do. Are you willing to take it as a store credit? And I get it. From my standpoint, they want to make sure that I'm not taking the dollars and go somewhere else. I love Costco. And my response to them was, no, absolutely. I'm fine with the store credit because I can get all the other valuable items that I need. I didn't need a television alone. I can get all the other valuable items that I need. And I'm willing to use your institution, your establishment for those items. But it was about the trust that I built with them over a number of decades. They were willing to take care of me for that product. And I was willing to frequent their establishment. But that trust can be critical when you have that bond and that relationship.
That's right. So that would be the idea, is that you establish a name. And we used to say, when I was in the Navy, we used to say, one aw heck. It takes 100 attaboys to overcome one aw heck. Aw heck, you didn't do it right this time, Jonathan. So trust is built over time. It doesn't come immediately. But when employers know that your program, whether state or local or federal or private enterprise program that's turning out good quality members of the workforce that are productive, that are efficient, then that trust gets built. And so I think from a higher education perspective, the idea would be to create partnerships. You had an interesting guest a couple of times ago. I watched Wes Juray, and he talked about the critical importance of partnerships and interactive partnerships. And I think one of the things he said is, look, I want the leader. I want the thought leader, the execution leader of this organization to know the leaders of the other organizations, and we're all going to, get together. And so you create partnerships, but then you put the accountability for sustainment of those relationships at the very top.
Okay.
And there's an old leadership axiom. Let's see if I can get it right. You can delegate authority, but you can't delegate responsibility.
Right.
The buck stops here, kind of a thing.
Exactly.
And so, when leaders that are interacting with each other to produce something that goes out to the public, and they all have the same level of accountability to their responsibilities,
right,
then I think you're starting with that trust proposition.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
The partnerships you mentioned. So one of my questions is, how do you build collaboration opportunities? How do you build so particularly for workforce development professionals, how do you build this collaboration, this opportunity for collaboration as a part of your infrastructure so that partnerships isn't something that's odd to think about? I'm always intrigued. In my entire career, I've never seen it as a zero-sum game. So even if we're competitors, I still see opportunities for us to partner. How do you get the ecosystem to really partner well? Yeah. We had someone on the program that'll be released, and they discussed having 14 independent organizations work together and collaborate. So these CEOs gave up their title for the benefit of the entire community. They merged into one organization to create the outcomes that you speak about. How do we create that environment of collaboration and collaboration opportunities?
Yeah. It's tough, and it's very interesting. So the enterprise that I managed in the federal realm was really interesting. We had multiple services. So, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, Space Force, and they all have leads, and they have big footprints, right? And there were also those 670,000 courses a year didn't come from one institution.
Right.
It didn't come from 100 institutions. It came from 2,500 different institutions.
Wow.
And so you're in this partnership with some real heavy hitters, and you're in your informal relationships where, like MOU type formalized relationships with presidents of large universities, and so you've got to be able to, someone has to step up and say, it's my responsibility to reach out to this heavy hitter.
Yes.
And, this service level secretary, or something like that, or this, I think I read your alma mater is Virginia Tech. Is that right? Yeah.
Right.
So reach out to the president of Virginia Tech, and say, hey, listen, that was one of my partners as well. Although I didn't have a whole lot of interaction with that university, had plenty of interaction with other presidents of universities, and someone has to be willing to say, I am not just as heavy a hitter, but I have a seat at this table.
Yes.
And so does that person. And let's get together and let's see if we can make something happen for America, and or for my county, or for my local labor board, or whatever it is, but know who the players are, know who the heavy hitter, know who has the heart for the mission that's similar to yours, and then just talk and create time and space to be together. And like Wes said, say, and you can't delegate this.
Right.
This is us,
right.
And so that's a great starting point.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and I'll tell you one other thing too,
absolutely.
Is that it doesn't have to be collaboration it doesn't have to be purposeful collaboration. Like, for instance, you and I have a mutual friend, Ramon Serrato of the Serrato Corporation, right? And Ramon called me up and said, there's someone I'd like you to meet. His name's Ronnie. And so you and I now are sitting down together, and we don't have a mutual stake in anything.
Right.
But what we do have, I think, from an hour or so worth of conversation is a little bit of trust.
Right.
And so, those kinds of interactions, when Ramon calls me and says, hey, I want to introduce you to someone you can trust.
Right.
And he says the same thing to you.
Right.
Then, you're building your brand.
You are. That is so true.
Yeah.
Do you think, so you've been in education, you worked at the federal level. Where do you think we can have the most impact? I was thinking, I'll tell you kind of the origin of the conversation. As we've been speaking, I was thinking back to, I think it was Tip O'Neill that said all politics is local. Mm-hmm. And and not to make this from a political perspective, but when we look at executing some of the programs around workforce development, and some of my other guests spoke about other countries having their workforce development federalized across the entire country. And we're probably too large for that. And we were built as a decentralized model for the most part with states' rights. Can we achieve it at the local level? Do we need more statewide guidance? Do we need more federal guidance? How do we build that collaboration between our own internal workings as a country to create effective workforce programs and educational programs?
Yeah. I'm really big on digging out personal desire.
Okay.
I like to use the word. So you could maybe use the word expectations,
Sure,
but there's no, gut level, visceral strength behind the word expectations. But desire, everybody gets it. And so, like, everybody's got a fire in their belly. Every single person has a fire in their belly for something.
right.
And you can call the name you can give to that is their desires. And they have desires about their workforce, where they see themselves fitting into the workforce, what they see themselves doing, how it fits with their values, how it fits with their interests, how it meets their economic needs, their geographic needs. So I've met people that I got to get back to Mississippi. That's all I need to do. I don't care what I do. I just got to get back to Mississippi,
Right.
And so everybody's got desire at the individual level. Got to tap into those desires. If you can tap into those desires, what your potential workforce wants, then you can show them a pathway to get them what they want, and they'll walk through fire for you for that.
And I agree. And I think part of that, it might be a slightly unfair question to have asked, but I look at all the organizations doing a lot of great work around the country. And the reason I asked about the collaboration, it would be great for them to see some of what the others are doing, to learn from those shared experiences or different experiences, and then work together to try to figure out good common solutions. But there's so many organizations out there, and you mentioned Ramon Serrato, and we keep evaluating how do we work together to get the results that we want. Mm-hmm. And we struggle with that because it's just, the country's large. We have over 330 million people. I don't think federalizing it is certainly the right answer on a lot of these items because there's so many parts that are unique and so many needs that are just local and unique. But I just think, so part of creating a podcast is to share this information, right? That's kind of our solution to the question, but how do we share your insight and speak to someone else that's doing something slightly different so that people are learning and figuring out solutions? So that's kind of the premise behind the idea.
Yeah. And I think there's a way to get there. And I think, look, I've always built everything that I have done professionally around relationships.
Right.
And so I'm more of a relationship person at heart. But data is so intriguing.
It is.
And so, what I think is that we have never been at a time in our history where we had so much access to data collection instrumentation. And so, we can actually, and I've proven it with over 1 million individual level contributors to my database of individual desire. Right. But there's also a database of corporate desire or, macroeconomic desire. And so I think in terms of like the critical infrastructure workforce, I'm not sure if this is a real term or one that I've coined in my mind. Critical infrastructure workforce, those things that national objectives start to crumble if you don't have a competent workforce filling in the needs there. So things like law enforcement, healthcare, security, both physical and cyber security, transportation and logistics, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, additive manufacturing, all of these kinds of things are critical infrastructure workforce.
Right.
And we know where the gaps are.
Right.
We know, and we know where the desires are. And so big data large language models can merge those two data sets. And so once we know who can go where at whatever timeline is on the mind of the individual and of the corporate entity, then we can start building out pathways and mapping out pathways and saying, here's your pathway at the individual level. Then when we aggregate that, we start to see real change, real value in the workforce. So,
now, I know we need to close this one out as well. This has been a delightful conversation. I'm so grateful that you came back again. This is a wonderful time to be on this planet, right? I'm having fun sharing information, figuring out solutions. And what you just mentioned is absolutely true. I shared this some months ago in a conversation. The ability for us to access information is unlike any other time in the past. And when I was growing up, my parents purchased the Encyclopedia Britannica from a door-to-door salesperson. And by the time they printed the information, it was relatively old. Today, you get real-time information from around the globe. Now, we have to vet it to make sure we're getting good content these days, but the access to information in the palm of your hand from an electronic device using the internet is just incredible. Yeah. So we have a chance to make major impact just because of the sharing of information that's available today.
But I'd be willing to bet, Ronnie, that you and your siblings read that Encyclopedia Britannica from cover to cover 9 times each. Yeah,
that's that. And I had a thesaurus. My parents were fantastic so that we can understand, word choice and diction. And it was an incredible part of our home.
Yeah, that's right. But you availed yourself of the resources that were there. And that's the key right now in workforce development, I think, is that the resources are so incredible. Let's avail ourselves of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dr. Woods, Dr. Jonathan Woods, thank you again for joining us. And we have to keep talking. We'll bring you back on the program and have you share more insight and update us on what you're doing in education and the science of learning.
Thank you.
Appreciate having you. Thanks for joining us on the I Build America podcast, where we're sharing ideas, giving you insight, bringing people like Dr. Woods to the program so you can learn from his experience and his journey. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the I Build America podcast. Please subscribe, share, and comment, and be sure to join us next time for more insights and inspiring conversations on building a powerful American workforce. I Build America, building workforce success one podcast at a time.
I build America.